Hello, hello. Welcome. This is our second live stream. Thank you for joining us. My name is James. I am one of the directors at Strong Towns Langley. That's a local conversation group here in Langley, British Columbia, Canada. And today we're doing part two. If you missed yesterday's session, that was our kind of test run. You can watch that. We're going to be doing part two. So part one, we talked about how much suburban development costs. Today, we're going to be talking about how streets and roads, how Strong Towns talks about streets and roads. It's different to how they're typically built and planned in the US and Canada. And there's a great video, which I've got queued up here from PBS 13 on YouTube, which is basically an introduction to Strong Towns. And so we'll go through that. We'll give it a watch. And as we go, I'll comment and add things. And I think you'll find it interesting. So without any further ado, let's get started.
As a human walking in this space, it's terrifying because you have vehicles going by at really high speeds, like mere feet away.
Charles Marone is showing me around his hometown of Brainerd, a small city of about 14,000 in central Minnesota. But this stretch of Washington Street with its speeding cars, chain stores, and restaurants could be anywhere.
It just winds up to be like the typical nasty American environment.
Marone once designed roads just like this during his nearly 2 decades as a civil engineer and land use planner. But he gradually came to believe that what he was doing was all wrong.
I became, in a sense, kind of like a heretic inside the profession, saying, like, the stuff we're building doesn't work.
Marone left engineering and started the advocacy group Strong Towns in 2009. He's written
So on a
books.
button here as well. Already, I'm jumping in. And that's the interesting thing is that Charles Marone, he was an engineer. So he was, he was more of a consultant, but I think he also worked for cities as well. And he stood up and say, what we're doing is wrong. And that can be really hard. And especially when you have systems that are set up that give you work to do, basically. We plan cities from the top down, which gives a lot of work to city planners, and maybe more work than the otherwise would have in a more Strong Towns bottom-up style. And the same goes for engineering. Designing big, wide, complicated roads can be beneficial. And that's why I think he says he's like a heretic, because you're essentially almost turning against the systems that are in place that kind of help your career in a way. But it's not quite that black and white. But yeah, it's just something to think about when we get into this.
So far, hosts a podcast and tours the country giving talks about better ways to build cities.
Where is the wealth? Where's the most productive parts of the city?
One of the things you'll often hear Marone railing against is strips like this, and he's coined a term for them. He calls them stroads.
A stroad is this street-road hybrid. It tries to be both a street and a road. A street is a platform for building community wealth. There's buildings, there's people, there's commerce. This is a space where humans can be comfortable in. A road's a high-speed connection between two places.
Like a highway.
It's literally like, how do we get from this place to this space in the quickest, most efficient way? A stroad, we call this the futon of transportation. When you think of a futon as being an uncomfortable couch that makes into an uncomfortable bed, a stroad tries to do two things at once, and it fails at both.
And that's absolutely right. So what we see is across cities across North America is these stroads, very big, wide roads designed to carry high volumes of traffic, and along them are the typical things you would find along a street, but far more spread out with big, setback with big parking lots and so on. And I think something that this report maybe doesn't go into depth is, again, it's like I'm always interested in when I learn about these things is why? Why are we done it this way? He said later on, I think Charles sort of talks a little bit about it kind of being the identity. But I think there's a sort of a trap. I think there's a trap that a lot of cities fall into, which is that they'll have a road, like we talk about at the start, they'll have a road that's a high-speed connector and it works great. And then there becomes a temptation to go, okay, we already had this existing piece of infrastructure we're paying for, and something we talked about is the cost of suburban development. It's very expensive. So they're looking for ways to save money, and they go, let's use the road we have and start putting things on it. We'll add some driveways, we'll put in traffic lights, we'll put in more intersections, and we'll just start building housing and shops and things along the existing road that we have. And that causes the kind of problems we're going to see later in the video. But it's a very common trap, and it can be very hard to resist the temptation, I think, for cities to do that. Because, well, you can say, well, I've got this road already there. Why wouldn't I start putting things along it? Why do I have to go build something way back there when I've got this road ready, all done? It's got the infrastructure and everything. So that can make things difficult politically and hard to justify from a financial standpoint as well. But let's just carry on.
Road is trying to accommodate people on foot like a street, but it also has cars traveling at very high speeds because Marone says it was designed like a highway. The lanes are wide, and so are the shoulders. The corners and curves are sweeping, so drivers don't need to slow down much. And the sides of the roads have been cleared of obstructions like trees.
Drivers respond to that by speeding up. And let's be clear, this is not like reckless drivers respond by speeding up. This is all drivers.
The Strode's designers put in features for people on foot, in wheelchairs, and on bikes, but they don't make a lot of sense. First, the crosswalks are about a half-mile apart.
They're expecting somebody to walk all the way up there,
Yeah.
or all the way down there to get across the street.
Right.
How likely is that?
It's not likely at all. No one would do that.
Case in point, this guy who dashed across 5 lanes of traffic right in front of us.
You're just watching
So this is exactly what happens when you try and mix, these facilities like shops and businesses and housing, and you place them along these types of roads. People are inevitably going to want to cross the road to get from one place to another. They don't want to get back in their car, go down the street, maybe do a U-turn, because you can see right there is a center median, or go down to the nearest light just to go across the street. Why would you want to do that? They want to just walk across the street. It's a natural human thing, but the environment, because you've either retrofitted this road with businesses now, or you designed it from this day one, either way, you've created this problem where you are forcing people to use their car. Well, the only way they can feel safe, basically, is by using their car to get across the street. And of course, then you wonder, why are roads congested? Why is traffic so bad? Well, even crossing the street requires a car at this point.
Go crossing.
Rather than risk our lives, we headed to the traffic light. But we had to get across streets that didn't have any crosswalks.
There's no crosswalk here, and if you talk to the designers, they will actually say, well, we don't want to encourage people to cross.
But how am I supposed to get to the crosswalk up there?
It's not contemplated.
And when we finally got to the signal, Marone explained that the huge light poles were designed to bend and fall if hit by a car.
So you with me? We're trying really hard to protect the driver. But we also have you stand right here next to this pole and ask for permission to cross the street.
And that's because this is a car environment first, with pedestrian stuff tacked on to try and make up for that. That's why. When they start building this, they're thinking only about traffic flow, level of service. Oh, wait, people want to cross. Okay, let's just throw a button here. That's the approach. And of course it is, because that's the only way you would end up with this environment. If you were thinking about people first, it would look nothing like this.
This is like the worst place to be.
We met Brainerd local Kendra Korsgaard waiting to cross. She has epilepsy and doesn't qualify for a driver's license, so she gets around town on foot, by bike, and on this small electric scooter.
I got hit right over here by Walgreens, and as I was walking this way, the dude came flying through the intersection, and I literally went like this on his car, and They said, I have the right of way.
Course Guard's also been struck while riding her bike, but luckily wasn't hurt.
Stroads tend to have the highest rate of accidents, the highest rate of crashes, the highest rate of fatalities.
And those fatalities are surging. In 2021, pedestrian deaths in the U.S. hit a 40-year high, rising to nearly 7,500. Nearly 1,000 bicyclists died the same year.
Why do we keep building places like this?
It's the million-dollar question. I think the easy answer is that this is the model we have.
That model, Marone says, first came to be after World War II, as wartime industries were shutting down and the nation feared falling into another Great Depression.
What happened is we took our cities and we turned them into machines of growth. And we said, we can jumpstart American prosperity by building interstates, by subsidizing housing, by creating the suburbs, and by growing our cities in this horizontal fashion.
New highway design standards were created and wound up being the design standards for all new streets.
It was the apple.
And so I add on to that point as well about being an engine for growth. I think it's because when you adopt this system, effectively you are becoming dependent on the potential wealth of that land. And that is something we see at the local government level as well, where cities will go, wow, we have, 2,000 acres of developable land. We need to build on that. We'll charge developers DCCs, developer charges, or impact charges, whatever you want to call them, and we'll also charge them other fees, and we'll be rich because we have all this land. We're going to cash in. Of course, again, this is one of those common traps. We see cities falling into it all the time. But one, it requires all of this car infrastructure to be built. Well, not just car infrastructure, all the infrastructure: water pipes, sewer pipes, roads, highways, to then service this expansion, which in the long term often undoes a lot of the benefits of the growth. So when you look at it in the long term, it's not as profitable. But of course, city councils are often elected on a 4-year term, so they can bring in a surge of money, get something paid for, and they'll leave the crumbling road, 20 years down the line, the crumbling road and the leaking water and sewer pipes, they'll leave that for the next mayor or council to pick up the pieces. As long as they get the cash in their hand today, they'll be fine. But they think they'll be fine. But that's not a multi-generational way of thinking, a multi-term way of thinking. And again, that's the kind of benefits of these Strong Towns local conversation groups, is we don't care about being elected, or maybe some want to be elected, but our priority isn't being elected and bringing in surges of cash. Our priority is long-term financial resilience and sustainability, and which this way of suburban sprawling outwards is not compatible with at all.
Of highway standards to a neighborhood. And we rolled out this machine across the continent, and we built this new version of America. And that version of America became, in many ways, our national identity.
This sprawl, Marone argues, has left us with serious liabilities. Building Stroads is expensive. All the pavement, lights, sidewalks, pipes, and storm drains cost millions of tax dollars. But one block might only contain a couple of stores and parking lots, which Marone contends won't generate anywhere near enough tax revenue to pay for future repairs and maintenance.
We see across the country today local government debt levels that are extraordinarily high. And
Langley, $668 million of debt right now with Township of Langley. I would say that's extraordinarily high. And prior to that debt level, we were in serious financial trouble. And that's why we built Willoughby, which was let's quickly build some density to help cover our losses. And we'll build it the cheapest, quickest, as fast as we can. We'll keep developer fees low. This is a very, very common trap. And this is where it gets difficult, because you don't, I'm not pointing, obviously it sounds like I am, and maybe I kind of am, pointing the finger at the mayor council saying what you're doing is wrong. But they're not bad people. This is something that cities everywhere have fallen into, this trap. They're not bad people. It is just, a very, very common mistake.
The backlogs of infrastructure maintenance, all these roads we have to fix, all these sidewalks we have to fix, without the tax base or the capacity to do it.
A more productive way to build, Marone says, looks like this. Streets, where development is compact, meaning less infrastructure spending and upkeep per building. On a single block, there could be a dozen locally owned businesses, all paying taxes and providing jobs.
This little 4-block area here is the most financially productive part of the entire county.
It also just feels more safe and appealing.
The environment's just slower. It's less intense, right? And it's not that there's less activity. We actually see more people here, more stuff going on than we did there. It's just not of the kinetic automobile variety.
Why is traffic going slower here?
The geometry of the space doesn't allow you to go fast. The lanes are narrow, they're tight, the curb radiuses are smaller. There's stop signs quite frequently, so you get to the end of the block, you have to stop. There's a deferral here from the automobile perspective to people in this space.
So could we use some of these street design ideas to improve stroads? Marone says, sure, tightening up lanes and corners and adding
I'm
compact...
going to interrupt again, because that's interesting that they've leapt from that. They've gone, look at these streets. Can we improve the stroads? Well, I go even... before we even talk about that, let's talk about those streets. Because most of those streets are illegal to build. They don't have enough parking, so they don't meet the parking regulations. The engineering department would complain that the streets are too narrow, the lanes are too narrow, or maybe there's not enough lanes. They're mixed use instead of single use, which we do see some more mixed use being built now. But the problem with mixed use that we see today is that due to building codes and other regulations and so on, can be cost prohibitive, because that commercial ground floor has to be concrete, or has to be fire separated, I should say. So that typically means a concrete podium with a wood frame apartments above it. And unless you're building tall, you can't. It's hard to justify the cost, especially when you combine it with the required parking minimums. Now, the parking minimums take away, maybe it would be more financially viable. So not only do we... So I think before you go, oh, can we fix the stroads? You need to go, well, can we just build streets again?
Roundabouts can help prevent cars from speeding, but none of that would address the bigger problem. And this is what Marone is trying to change.
We have invested 70 plus years in a development model that is a dead end. I think then the question becomes, what do we do now? And I just start with the notion that we don't need any more highway lanes. We don't need to build any more infrastructure. What we need is a national program, and this needs to start from the bottom up. It needs to start at cities. A national program to make better use of the investments we've already made. We have to start moving our neighborhoods from being centered around getting automobiles through quickly to creating place for people to be in.
Wow. Well, that is the Strong Towns message, and it's a lot, actually, in those few sentences, that it can be easy to kind of miss things. You think, what? We're going to stop building highways, stop building roads? Like, you crazy? But when you think about it, we have so many roads everywhere. And we need to, exactly what he says, make what Charles Road says right there, make better use of what we have. Don't go, I'm going to build a brand new neighborhood over here with new roads, sewer, blah, blah, blah. No, we go, let's go back to this neighborhood that was built in the 1980s that's just single family homes on 5,000 square foot lots, and let's have some little apartments on the corner. Let's allow people to make the bottom floor of their home a retail. Let's, try and encourage more flexibility, and also place the trust in the people who live in those suburbs to do that. Don't just lock it all down with regulation and then complain that it's a NIMBY neighborhood when you're the one in charge of that regulation. Let's go back to those neighborhoods. Is there a big parking lot in that neighborhood? I know here in my neighborhood in Walnut Grove, there's an absolutely massive parking lot around the movie theater. Let's see if we can figure out a way to get that, put townhomes around the perimeter of the parking lot. That is adding housing and adding businesses within using what we have already, those existing roads, and then those will help pay for the upkeep of the infrastructure. So we don't keep going to deficit and keep trying to build more and more to top up the coffers. That is the Strong Towns way, and it's a more politically challenging way. It is and it isn't. But I only think it's challenging because we have created these platforms that foster opposition, as opposed to platforms that encourage change and development and the neighborhood to thrive. Effectively, with the regulation stomping out anything, we're denying these neighborhoods the ability to mature and gain investment, and that's what we need to change. But that's the end of this video, which I think is a great introduction to Strong Towns. I love this video. The next one is going to be Not Just Bikes, and he basically talks about how the roads in the Netherlands, they have a system that is much different than how we do it here. So I'm going to let Not Just Bikes get started.
If you live in the US or Canada, then this will certainly look familiar to you. Multiple lanes of car traffic, wide highway-sized lanes, giant signs, traffic lights, parking lots, lots of driveways and side streets with traffic merging in and out, and a place that's nearly impossible to cross as a pedestrian. There isn't even a sidewalk here. These are what Strong Towns refers to as stroads, which is a horrible name, and that's intentional because these are horrible places. Stroads are a street-road hybrid, and they are dangerous, expensive, and ineffective. I'll get to those issues in a moment, but first, let's talk about the difference between a street and a road, according to Strong Towns. This is a road. It is a high-speed connection between two places. Because of the high speeds involved, there are several safety features. The lanes are wide and forgiving so that vehicles do not bump into each other. The road is as straight as possible, and when curves are necessary, they're designed to be gentle, making it easy to drive along. The area next to the road, called the clear zone, is free of any obstacles that could be hit, just in case a vehicle runs off the road.
Have you noticed how nice those roads look, by the way? Look how smooth that is. Look how nice that is. When you have roads that are just for this purpose, it's interesting. They don't get worn out as much, or maybe it's partly because there's more of because they're more scarce. Well, not scarce, but more moderated in how many of these roads there are. It's easier to keep them maintained to a higher standard.
Signs are very large, designed to be read from a distance and at high speeds. And entrances and exits are few and far between because the road is designed to keep vehicles at a high speed for as long as possible to minimize travel times. Roads are important. We need roads, though I personally prefer my roads to have rails. This is a street. It is a complex environment where life in the city happens. Buildings are placed right next to the sidewalk to be easily accessible by people walking, and it gives a sense of space, almost like an outdoor room. This is a place that feels comfortable to be in, so you find people here. There are many entrances and exits to and from the street, and there may also be street parking for vehicles and deliveries. This is an environment meant for slow speeds because this is a destination, not a thoroughfare. High-speed traffic is not compatible with lots of human activity, so vehicle speeds are reduced. Everything on the street is at a human scale. It's designed to be inviting, encouraging people to walk, to window shop, or to just sit and watch the world go by.
I think I briefly mentioned in the last video, and that's exactly it. That is, streets are a destination. There's somewhere you go, and you will spend maybe half the day there. You'll hang out with your family or friends, going from place to place. You know, it's not just about utility, it's about the experience as well, and the social aspects of the street as a public space for people, not for cars. But, you know, in suburban planning, this is typically replaced with the mall, shopping mall, which is not the shopping mall that has a very high barrier to entry for businesses, typically. It's one single owner renting units. And, you know, I'm not going to disrespect the shopping malls. I think there's definitely a place for shopping malls in the world. But they can't be our only option. You know, these kind of streets where we have bottom-up community involvement in starting small business, in also having, and also as well, completely forgot to mention, is the fact that malls typically, some do, but they typically don't have residential as a component. I wish more malls did, and that's a great way to start improving a shopping mall. But you can see right here, and on most of the shots he's shown so far, there are apartments above every shop. So people who work in the stores can live within walking distance, or people who just want to be near everything can have the choice to sacrifice, having a big house or a townhouse. They could say, I want to be near everything happening. I'll live in one of those apartments above the shops, and then I can walk out my door and I can get everything I need, and it's really convenient.
The street is designed to get the most value out of the space available. Streets are very important, and we definitely need streets. A strode, on the other hand, is neither of these things. Just like how a futon converts from a terrible uncomfortable couch to a terrible uncomfortable bed, the strode is the futon of transportation. It is a street that is designed like a road, and in doing so, it fails at being good at either one.
Now, as I sort of alluded to, it's interesting to say it's a street that's designed as a road. Now, I don't know. I think every strode has a different story behind it. I think some have evolved gradually. Some have started roads and they become stroads. Some have, maybe they were planned like this from day one. But I always get the feeling that they aren't designed. They just sort of happen by a kind of weird collection of coming together of different forces. You'll have a developer that says, I want to build a shopping mall here. And then the engineering department goes, well, or this planning department goes, we need a road to get to it. And the engineering department then says, we want a 4-lane road. And that's kind of how it sort of happens over time. It's almost like if they were really, I don't think anyone would truly design this as an ideal place. I think they just sort of happen as a collection of of different people kind of pushing their own set of frameworks and guidelines, and that's how we kind of end up with it. Maybe I'm wrong, correct me in the comments if I am, but that's kind of how I feel they kind of happen.
The strode fails at being a street. There are many driveways to businesses and homes like you'd find on a street, but mixed with multiple highway-sized lanes. This mixes high speeds with many points of conflict. Watch out for this white car turning, and this cyclist. Are there any cars coming out of these driveways? Unlike a street, stroads are hostile to people outside of a car. There are lots of motor vehicles and speeds are high, so walking or cycling feels uncomfortable and dangerous. There are long distances between places, and there are often large parking lots that need to be crossed before getting anywhere. And it's basically impossible to cross the strode except by walking to a traffic signal and waiting. The signs are large and meant to be read while driving, which feels really out of scale if you're walking there. And often trees have been removed from the clear zone, making the environment even more uninviting if you're not in a car.
And this is exactly what I said earlier. This is not designed for people. People are tacked on. Fine, we'll put in a sidewalk. Fine, have a crosswalk. You really want one. You know, that's kind of the feeling you get. It's just, this is the result of designing it to make sure the traffic flow is going. And then, okay, I guess we'll cover that situation with pedestrians.
Somehow, though, painted bicycle gutters are still okay in the clear zone. Traffic engineers are concerned about drivers hitting a tree. Hitting a cyclist is expected. This is clearly a place for cars, so it's unsurprising that pretty much everyone drives here. Trust me, it sucks to walk down this strode. But these environments are ugly anyway. Nobody cares about these places and nobody wants to spend any time here. Cities in the US and Canada are covered in terrible non-places like this. Places you go because you have to, not because you want to.
And that's exactly that's what I was saying before. It's, oh, I gotta go to the hardware store, let me hop in my car, drive to the hardware store. Oh, I got the piece of plumbing I need or what have you, I'm gonna go home. Done. Oh, I need to go this. Okay, I'll drive there. Got it. Okay, I'll go home. And it leads to, I mean, we could go on a whole tangent here on the societal impacts of that in terms of, you know, loneliness, isolation, atomization, you know. Sure, you might bump into some people at the store, but it's in terms of people gathering together and having, you know, this is why, I mean, obviously you can hear from my accent. I grew up in England, and so when I was growing up at school, we'd be like, okay, you want to meet meet on the high street later, hang out. You know, that was a normal thing to do, and everyone knew where the high street was, or, you know, where the specific area was that kids would go. You know, that sort of thing was a normal thing. And when you plan and it's so beneficial to our brains and our development and our understanding of the world, understanding of different kinds of people, our mood, to have these places. And with the suburban planning, you rip that away. You know, all your public space has gone to wide roads, it's gone to parking lots, and you don't have a central gathering place that's everyone in the city knows. And I know there are efforts, you know, in Langley and the township of Langley, they're talking about what would be our true town centre for the whole of Langley Township. Obviously, the city has the Fraser Highway, the one-way stretch. That's kind of their high street, their downtown. But the township still doesn't have a clear one. Willoughby Town Centre is probably the closest, maybe. But again, Willoughby Town Centre has a giant parking lot in the middle. And so it's a process, and it's when you sprawl so rapidly, you don't end up with a natural centre. You end up with lots of little pockets of neighbourhoods here and there. And there are benefits to that. Walnut Grove has a town centre as well, I should mention that. You know, but it's challenging.
Actually sits and watches the world go by on this bench. But the Strode fails at being a road too. The lanes are wide and there are a lot of them. You're surrounded by asphalt, but you can't actually get anywhere quickly like you can with a road. There are cars constantly changing lanes and going in and out of the Strode, slowing down traffic and introducing many points of conflict that require drivers to constantly slow down to avoid a collision. Traffic volumes can be quite high on Strodes because there are no viable alternatives to driving. Distances are too far to walk and it's too unsafe to cycle, and since public transit gets stuck in traffic anyway, only the poor and the desperate will take the bus. So everyone drives. But because there are so many crossroads, entrances, and exits to the Strode, traffic lights are required, meaning drivers are constantly stopping at red lights. And because speeds are high, light timings need to be very long, leading to traffic signal-induced congestion. nobody is getting anywhere quickly on a strode. All of these elements make stroads unsafe as well, and the majority of fatal crashes within cities happen on stroads. They are especially dangerous to people walking and cycling. The wide and straight design of highways were designed that way to make them safe for high-speed traffic. But the strode to hell is paved with good intentions. On a strode, these wide highway-like designs encourage drivers to drive quickly. But combining that with traffic turning in and out of driveways and lots of four-way junctions makes this the most dangerous type of urban driving possible.
He's exactly right. And the statistics back this up. If you look at Langley here, Langley is probably one of the worst for widening roads and building these long stroads, and then with lots of intersections with also other wide roads. And that has resulted in Langley having some of the highest crash rates in the entire province, if you look at the ICBC statistics. So does that mean that Langley drivers are inherently worse? No. I mean, it may encourage people who shouldn't be driving to feel they have to drive because it's such a pedestrian hostile environment, which probably does decrease the quality of the driving. But it's because as soon as you widen a road, and you can even watch in the statistics, as soon as a road is widened, a year later you'll check and the accident rate's gone up. And the flatter and straighter it is, the wider it is, the worse the accident rate. Because people are driving faster, they have less time to think and react. So it's this design, we often talk about this. This is not just bad for pedestrians, it's bad for everyone. It makes there's so many points of conflict in a strode situation. And because the rate of speed is higher, you've basically, you create far more deadly accidents. Is that the kind of place we really want to build? I don't think so.
This is an inherently unsafe way to design a road, and it's part of the reason why the US has the most dangerous roads of any developed country. For example, during the coronavirus lockdowns in the first 9 months of 2020, car volumes in the US dropped significantly. But despite an estimated 355 billion fewer miles driven, fatal crashes per mile actually increased by up to 34%. This brings us to the sad truth, that the only reason these unsafe American stroads aren't killing even more people regularly is because they're usually so jammed up with traffic that drivers can't get going fast enough to kill each other. And finally, stroads are really expensive. Because stroads are built to a highway standard, their lanes are very wide and there are never less than 4 lanes. Plus, there's normally extra space for shoulders and clear zones at the side of the road too. Because stroads try to be streets, there are many entrances and exits, so many turning lanes are required. But because of the high speeds, turning lanes are much longer than on a street, taking up even more space.
And that's another funny thing too, if we talk about other cities, like there's another great video on Carmel, Indiana, and a way you can avoid those turning, like when people have to turn across a median, is to use roundabouts. So someone can go to the roundabout, just do a loop back, and then go back the other way. So that's a way you can avoid all these turning lanes and things like that. And it's also a problem with just traffic lights in general, is that they create these huge backups. Even if you widen and widen the road, it doesn't solve the underlying issues with traffic signals.
And as traffic increases even more, due to traffic entering and exiting the strode, the city will install another traffic signal for $750,000. All of this means that a strode is much bigger than a road that would carry the same amount of traffic, and significantly larger than a street that would have the same number of businesses and houses along it. As the size of the strode increases, there are several other costs incurred. High-speed stroads need to be flat, so the area that needs to be graded increases. Land may need to be purchased from residents to widen the strode and destroy their property values. By the way, do you think this girl is waiting to cross this 5-lane strode? Flood protection infrastructure becomes much more expensive due to the impermeable surfaces, and there's a huge amount of asphalt and traffic control systems to maintain. And of course, because everyone drives, large parts of the landscape need to be dedicated to parking lots, meaning everything is inherently spread out in low density. Parking lots don't employ anyone, and they don't earn much tax revenue either. A strode environment is significantly less financially productive than a street, but with significantly more infrastructure. That
reminds me of something I also forgot to mention, is why do we have stroads? And another big factor in this is single-use zoning. And he kind of alluded to it there with everyone drives to large parking lots. What we've run into here is we have lots of residential areas in the north of the city, and all the commercial, most of the big commercial in the in the kind of center of the city, or center of the township, however you want to call it. So people go, I need to drive all the way down here, and I'll do my shopping, drive all the way back. So those cars, one, need big wide roads to get people in and out of the area, and two, need big parking lots to park, or big parking at the start and at the finish. And again, so that's when if you move away from the suburban planning and go, we're going to mix apartments, homes, townhomes with commercial, maybe smaller neighborhood commercial instead of these giant big box, you end up with something that is inherently more human scale, because you don't need these giant wide roads to carry all the traffic, between these two places. And you don't need the big parking lots. And that's how we can start to move away from this. We can start allowing more apartments to be built in commercial areas instead of keeping it single use.
Result is a mix of high cost per area maintenance expenses combined with low value per acre tax revenue, which makes these strode environments a net negative for cities. These places are literally putting American cities on the strode to financial ruin, and they're doing it while being dangerous, ugly, and ultimately ineffective at actually moving people. The strode fails at every metric, but it's the default setting for transportation design almost everywhere in the US and Canada. So what's the alternative? Well, Strong Towns advocates for one of two things. First, you can convert a strode into a road. This means limiting access to the strode, accessing businesses and neighborhoods from side streets. Painted bicycle gutters need to be removed because moving vehicles is the primary objective of a road. People can still walk or cycle, but these paths need to be completely separated from the flow of traffic. In this way, the strode becomes a road, a high-speed connection between two places.
But you need to, as we talked about, not fall into that trap. And also convince the local government not to build along it or ride on it. And that is very hard. We're seeing that happening right now in Langley with the 200 Street 2040 plan, which is converting 200 Street, which right now, well, it's sort of in between. It's between being a strode and a road. It really could be a high-speed connection from the north, the highway, to the downtown as just a road. That's how it used to be 10 years ago or so. And now they're building apartments along it. And there's a huge plan to build towers along it. And this and that. That is the challenge. Having the discipline, basically, to say this is a road. This is never going to be developed along. We're going to keep it high speed. But, municipal budgets are tight. It's almost, people would say, well, you're just wasting that infrastructure then if you're not going to build stuff along it. But when you build stuff along it, you create these horrible, hostile environments where the residents are having to breathe in, pollution and dust, brake dust and things like that because you're building apartments. And, there's a very poor, sort of toxic, I would almost say, school of thought right now, which is we will build apartments along the busy road and then everything else behind and use the apartments as like a wall. And that is something that's very problematic for a number of reasons. I won't get into it right now. But yeah, I don't agree with that approach. I think you keep a road, you keep it away from people, you keep it isolated, use noise barriers. We only really see that on provincial and federal highways. We don't see local governments stepping up often. Very often some do, but we don't see enough local government stepping up and committing to roads as roads. And maybe the Netherlands had this problem too, because he's going to talk about what they did.
The other alternative is to turn the strode into a street. For this, the lanes need to be narrowed and parking needs to be moved to the curb or behind buildings, and the buildings themselves need to be built closer to the street. Everything needs to be brought down to a human scale, making it inviting to people and getting more value from the space available. This isn't a hypothetical, and we don't have to imagine what this would look like, because the Netherlands has already done it, just with 3 types of infrastructure instead of the 2 proposed by Strong Towns. You will almost never find a strode here, because in the 1990s, the Dutch adopted the concept of sustainable traffic safety. And one of the key pillars of this program was that every road and street in the Netherlands has to be classified and designated as one of the following 3 options.
So they don't let the cities do it.
The first is a stroomweg, which is pretty straightforward. It is a motorway or highway.
So,
I think everyone is
clarifying what I just said. So they don't. This road classification system that he's going to go into essentially regulates cities and prevents them from building stroads intentionally or incrementally. It does not. It prohibits it. It's effectively regulation. It regulates them out of existence.
familiar with these, so I won't spend too much time on it. But the important thing here is that there are no traffic controls. Cars enter and exit through merge lanes, and you will never find a traffic light or roundabout on a stroomweg. Highways should also go around cities and never through cities. I'm looking at you, Cincinnati. Actually, that's not fair, because basically all American cities did this. Thankfully, the plan to do this to Amsterdam was unsuccessful.
Vancouver was lucky. Vancouver was very lucky. It didn't happen. It was stopped. And that's why I'll give credit to, people who are sometimes referred to as NIMBYs. They said, no, we don't want a highway through Vancouver. And they were absolutely right.
Moving one level down is the Gebiedsontsluitingsweg, the distributor road. These are the connectors between highways and streets. There may be entrances and exits to other streets and roads, but driveways to houses or businesses are avoided as much as possible. And if traffic controls are necessary, then roundabouts are preferred, unless traffic volumes require a traffic light. I'm going to refer to these as roads.
Now,
finally,
this is where I start to like to kind of think about, well, what are some local examples? And I can point to probably the best example I could think of as a road locally would be in 192nd Street, Surrey, when you go south off the bypass, you go towards Campbell Heights. That basically is 100% a road. There's nothing along it. It connects from the Langley bypass all the way south to Campbell Heights Business Park, and that is its only purpose.
There's the Erftoegangsweg, the neighborhood access street. These are the end destinations for journeys, the places where people live, work, shop, relax, and so on. I'm going to refer to these as streets. Streets are designed to be low speed with a speed limit of no more than 30 kilometers per hour, and they almost never have more than one motor vehicle lane per direction. In many cases, vehicle speeds are slow enough that separated bicycle infrastructure is not required, though bicycle paths may still be used to purposefully narrow the street, constraining the space available for motor vehicles. The street network is designed to discourage through traffic by cars, either through traffic calming or by explicitly blocking cars while still allowing walking, cycling, and public transit to take the most direct route. I've talked about this before in my invisible infrastructure video, where I show a typical trip by bicycle through the street network compared to the very different route by road that is taken when driving.
Once you again, look at that. So the driving road forces the cars to leave the city and go around the outside. And that is what we should be doing. And we don't do it. We go, oh, we're just going to build a wide road through the middle of the neighborhood. You know? That is not how you build pedestrian-friendly, human-friendly environments. You need to make the cars leave and go around. That's how it should be. That's how Willoughby should have been designed. Instead of 208 Street widen and slam right down the middle, we should have gone, you know what, let's figure out, can we do a road that runs outside Willoughby, away from all the houses, away from everything? But again, it boils down to cost. You have a road there, we'll just widen the road that we have. So this is the weird thing, because you go, well, that's incremental, isn't it? You're upgrading the road a little bit. But it is, and you're using, yes, you're using existing road infrastructure. Okay. But at what cost? And also, it's inefficient because it leads to a grid of wide roads. Instead of we just have one ring road or one perimeter road that everyone uses, you end up with a situation where suddenly all the roads in the neighborhood, you have all these arterial roads crisscrossing the neighborhood, which is more expensive. And, I mean, I'm not a planner. I know a little bit of planning, and maybe there are more studies into exactly why that happens. But if you want a livable place, you need to force the cars to the outside, far more than we do right now.
Learn about these three types of road in the Netherlands, what I'm unofficially calling highways, roads, and streets. It's really interesting to drive around and see which type you're on. This is a street. This is a road. This is a street. This is a road. This is a road with streets on either side to access houses. Since this is a relatively recent concept, only implemented about 30 years ago, the best place to see this in action is in newer developments. Here we are driving on a road outside the town of Nieuwleusen. This road is designed to move vehicles, so there is no direct access to adjacent properties. The homes and businesses are accessed by streets on the right and left side, and the road is mostly accessed by roundabout. As we exit the roundabout into this industrial park, the road turns into a street, where cars and trucks can access the warehouses and industrial facilities safely and efficiently without disrupting traffic on the road. It's also very interesting to see where one type turns into another. This is clearly a street, a residential street in Amsterdam. There is parking on either side, and there are many side streets branching off. There are no traffic lights or stop signs. Speeds are low here, so intersections are unmarked, and you give priority to any vehicle coming from the right. I've talked about this before in my video about stop signs. This street has a brick road surface, speed bumps, and other traffic calming measures to slow down traffic. The speed limit is 30 kilometers an hour, and bicycle and motor vehicle traffic is mixed. But as we travel down this street, we come to a set of traffic lights, and here is where this street becomes a road. The bicycle path becomes totally separated from motor vehicle traffic. There's no more street parking. The road surface is made of smooth asphalt, and there's a median separating the traffic lanes. There are buildings on either side, but crucially, they cannot be accessed by this road because turning traffic would be inefficient and unsafe. As we travel down this road a little farther, we can see here it turns back into a street. Here's another example in the suburb of Amstelveen. The right-of-way is about 22 meters, which in the US or Canada would be at least a 4-lane road with center turning lane. But despite the space available, there's only one lane of motor vehicle traffic in each direction here, and the lanes are narrow, which encourages drivers to drive slower. Single-lane roads are much safer because cars changing lanes introduces points of conflict between vehicles, and they are easier for pedestrians to cross. This also frees up space on both sides for car parking, a bicycle path, and a sidewalk.
So this is another excellent point, which is that you can accommodate a lot of traffic flow with just 2-lane roads, one lane each direction, and roundabouts. Traffic lights cause a lot of backups, and that leads people to get upset and start clamoring for roads to be widened. And they think that that's part of growth and that's necessary. But it's not. And some areas have done well with this. I'm looking at you, East Clayton, in Surrey. I don't think there's a single, other than Fraser Highway, I don't think there's a single 4-lane road. It's a lot of roundabouts, a lot of stop signs, and 2-lane, just like this. 1 lane each direction. That's all you need. Even 192 Street is parking and 1 lane each direction through Clayton. And that is quite a built-up neighborhood. There's a lot of houses. There's houses with laneways, basement suites, townhomes, apartment buildings. And yet they didn't need to do what we see in Langley, which is, oh my goodness, we need to widen the lane. Widen the road, quick. There's going to be traffic chaos. We've got to widen the road. We're building apartments. Got to widen the road. You don't need to do that, especially with roundabouts, because roundabouts keep the flow going. You're not stopping and creating a line of cars and then one starts being at the front when it goes green and then you got that delay. Why do we do this? Like, why are we stuck? We could see, like, this is what is so incredible about Not Just Bikes, and why his channel is so popular, I think, is he goes to Europe and shows what Europe is doing in comparison to what North America is doing. And how can you look at that and not go, what are we doing? What like Canada? Like, why are we doing this? It doesn't need to be this way. You know, and I live here. I moved from Europe to North America. I love it here. But we keep, and there are areas here that do it right. Like I said, East Clayton is one, even Walnut Grove. In Walnut Grove, a lot of the road, just 2 lanes, which is 1 lane each way. 208 Street, Walnut Grove, is a road with 2 lanes each way. It's not oversized. So when we get to places like Willoughby, and also what they're planning in the community plans in Brookswood, is this excessive road widening that's expensive, it's hostile to pedestrians, and it's just plain unnecessary. I don't care if the developer widens it for you. I don't care. Because you're the municipality is the one that's going to need to fix the potholes. And the municipality is going to be picking up the pieces. And it's the residents going to be suffering the wide road. I don't care if the road's free because of the developer. And also it's hidden in the cost of the housing. So it's not really free. You know? We need to stop. Just stop widening roads. Anyway, rant over.
There are multiple other streets intersecting with this one, bringing traffic in and out of the street. A few meters along, this street starts to turn into a road. Here you can see that access to the houses and parking on the right-hand side are provided by a small side street running parallel to the road, so that through traffic does not compete with drivers going in and out of parking spaces. Travel along this road a little farther and the street has completely turned into a road. There is a stoplight, multiple lanes of motor vehicle traffic, and an entrance to a highway. The bicycle path is two-way and isolated completely from the road. A little farther along, this road becomes quite interesting. Here, there are several houses, but instead of being accessed directly, as they would be on a strode, they're accessible by a two-way side street, which was made purposefully narrow to slow down drivers.
See, look, frontage
This
street.
also provides a safe alternative for people cycling. The road itself is only 2 lanes for car traffic.
I say that because I know some people hate frontage streets. But in some situations, I think they're really good. They do solve the problem in terms of safety, just like that.
Turning lanes when necessary. 1 lane has been reserved as a bus lane, and there is a 2-way cycling path as well. It's also interesting to note that because dedicated bus lanes and bicycle paths are much more efficient at moving people than car lanes, this road configuration can actually transport more people than a typical strode. The Netherlands didn't change this overnight, and this transition to roads and streets is not totally complete. There are still some streets here that carry too much through traffic, for example, but at least they're usually only 2 lanes wide. This change has happened slowly, with street and road redesigns spread out over the past 30 years. The first step, though, was identifying that there was a problem with road safety and road productivity, and changing the design standards to match. It's time to face the fact that designing stroads as both a high-speed thoroughfare and a destination simply doesn't work. Stroads are dangerous.
A warning before switching from that shot to this one of Strode in Houston. My goodness. What a contrast. It's shocking.
Dangerous and expensive. They destroy walkability. They make cycling dangerous and infeasible, and they don't work for drivers either. The US and Canada need to rethink the traffic engineering manuals that define urban spaces and start building productive streets and efficient roads. Then they can get on the road to recovery and benefit from fewer traffic deaths, more viable alternatives to driving, less traffic, and more financially productive cities. It's the end of the road for Strodes. Good riddance.